Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're plunging into a truly fascinating and frankly, quite unsettling case from British criminal history.
Yes, we're talking about Sidney Harry Fox. He was executed back in 1930.
Executed for the murder of his own mother. We've gathered quite a collection of details, haven't we?
We have. About his life, the very strange circumstances around his mother's death, the investigation that followed.
The trial, of course, and what's maybe most interesting for us now, the doubts that came up decades later.
Absolutely. It's not just some dusty old case file. It feels like a puzzle, really, stretching across nearly a century.
It really does. And what makes it so compelling, I think, is you've got several layers.
There's the rarity of matricide in the UK, for starters, and then there's the role of forensic pathology.
Which was pretty new back then, relatively speaking.
Exactly. It was crucial in getting the conviction, but then you have this later reappraisal of the evidence.
Which throws everything into question, doesn't it? Makes you rethink the initial conclusions and maybe the limits of that early forensic science itself.
Precisely. So our mission, if you like, in this deep dive is to try and piece together this complex story for you.
Right. We'll start with Fox's life. Sort of a journey marked by petty crime, which then escalated.
Then the events leading up to his mother's death. What actually happened or what seemed to happen.
And we'll look closely at that forensic evidence. It was so central at the time.
And finally, yeah, we'll get into the more recent challenges to those initial findings. Okay, let's get into it.
So, Sidney Harry Fox, where does his story begin?
Well, he was born in 1899. Sources describe him as the son of decent working Norfolk parents.
Okay, and his mother?
Rosalina Fox, born 1866, married William George Fox in 1887. They had 3 sons before Sidney.
So Sidney was the youngest.
Yes, and actually it seems he might have been a half-brother. The eldest son later said their father left when he, the eldest, was only 6.
Ah, okay. So maybe not the most stable family background from the start.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
A somewhat fractured dynamic, you could say.
And it sounds like young Sidney found trouble pretty early on.
He did. As a teenager, even when he was working in service, supposedly in respectable houses.
He was caught stealing.
Petty theft, yes. Which led to him being birched. It's quite striking, isn't it? These early acts sort of foreshadowing the more serious stuff later.
That's often a pattern, yeah. Minor deceptions escalating.
Indeed. And the sources say he learned quite a bit from his association with people of quality, became a sort of plausible, genteel con man before World War I.
Plausible and genteel. Right up until he wasn't, I suppose.
Well, quite. Things escalated when he landed a job at a London bank.
Oh, let me guess.
Forging checks on customer accounts.
Classic con man move, but I imagine that didn't last long.
No, unsurprisingly. But the timing of when he was caught in 1916 was interesting.
How so? Because of the war.
Exactly. Britain desperately needed soldiers. So Fox was offered a rather strange deal.
Immunity, if he signed up.
That's right. Immunity from prosecution if he enlisted. He joined the Royal Air Force.
Wow. And knowing Fox, he probably didn't just enlist quietly.
Huh. No. He managed to get an officer's commission, claimed he was an old Etonian.
Of course he did. He really had some nerve, didn't he? But even in the RAF, the old habits.
They died hard. Or rather, they didn't die at all. He used his banking skills to forge checks on his fellow officers.
Oh, honestly. You couldn't make it up. And that led to...
his downfall, inevitably. Caught. Sentenced to 3 months in prison. End of military career.
Right. So he gets out of prison. What happens then? What's life like for him and his mother now? He didn't exactly reform, did he?
No, not at all. They were in a really bad way. Sources say they were living on just 18 shillings a week.
Which is not much at all, even then. About 43 trends today, based on those 2010 figures.
Tiny amount. So they resorted to, well, cashing worthless checks, constantly moving from town to town, just surviving.
This sort of nomadic hand-to-mouth existence?
Precisely, until 1927 when Fox got nabbed again for fraud. Sent back to prison.
And his mother?
She ended up in the workhouse.
Grim. A really bleak situation. But even then, Fox was apparently still scheming. Tell us about this Mrs. Morse affair.
Ah, yes. This is, well, it's quite chillingly calculated, actually. He starts what the sources call a bogus affair with this Mrs. Morse.
Bogus how? Just for money?
Purely for money. She apparently had no idea he was homosexual. He used the access to her house to steal her jewelry.
Okay, bad enough. But there was more, wasn't there? The insurance.
Yes, this is where it gets really sinister. He took out a life insurance policy on her for £6,000.
£6,000 back then.
Thanks.
That's what was the equivalent again?
Over £284,000 in 2010 money. A staggering sum.
And then there was that incident with the gas tap.
Highly suspicious. Mrs. Morse woke up one night, found the gas tap in her bedroom turned on.
Unbelievable. That must have blown things wide open.
It did. Caused a huge scandal. Mr. Morse sued for divorce, naming Fox as the co-respondent. Fox got arrested for the jewelry theft, did more time.
And got out in March 1929.
Correct. And then what does he do? He reunites with his mother, and they go back to their traveling life, as the sources call it.
It's like this destructive pattern repeating. And given his history, especially with Mrs. Morse, you start to worry about his mother.
Well, yes. His attention seems to turn towards her as a potential source of funds.
It sounds awful, but were they almost like a team? In a very twisted way.
You could perhaps see it like that, a deeply dysfunctional dependency, but very quickly, Fox's financial scheming focuses directly on her.
How soon after he got out of prison?
Almost immediately. April 1929, just a month later, he convinces his mother, who, remember, is impoverished, to make a will leaving everything to him.
Not much to leave, presumably, but still, setting things up.
And then, May 1st, he takes out an insurance policy on her life. Crucially, it's an accidental death policy.
Okay, and the timing of that policy's expiry?
It was set to expire on October 23rd.
The very day she died. That's more than just eyebrow-raising, isn't it?
It certainly looks incredibly suspicious in hindsight.
So they end up in Margate. How did that happen?
They just turned up at a hotel. No luggage, apparently. Booked rooms.
Odd. And then came October 23rd, the last day of the insurance policy.
That's the day. Fox and his mother had dinner. Fox bought a half bottle of port, said it was a nightcap for her.
A nightcap. And later that night?
Around 11:40 p.m., Fox raises the alarm. Fire in his mother's room.
He reported it.
Yes. Another guest actually pulled her body out. She was partly clad.
And the initial assessment.
A local doctor came, certified the cause of death as suffocation and shock. Rosalina Fox was buried in Norfolk about a week later.
So at first glance, tragic accident. Case closed.
It might have been, but thankfully not everyone was convinced. The insurance investigators.
Ah, yes. They had a vested interest, didn't they?
They certainly did. They examined the scene, and they found something that just didn't quite fit with Fox's story.
What was that?
An unburnt patch of carpet. It was between where Mrs. Fox's body was found and the gas stove, which Fox claimed was the source of the fire.
So the fire didn't spread from the stove to the body area in the way you'd expect.
Exactly. It raised serious doubts. Enough for them to take the major step of requesting an exhumation.
So they dug up her body for a proper forensic examination.
Yes. And this is where early forensic science really takes center stage in this case. For better or worse, as we'll see.
This leads us to Sir Bernard Spilsbury, a huge name in forensic pathology at the time.
A legendary figure, yes. He and Dr. Roche Lynch conducted the post-mortem.
And what did they find? This was the crucial part.
Two key things. First, they observed what they identified as a bruise on Mrs. Fox's larynx.
Okay. Suggesting pressure on the throat.
Precisely. And second, crucially, they found no soot in her lungs.
Meaning she wasn't breathing when the fire was going.
That was their deduction. If she died from smoke inhalation, you'd expect to find soot particles deep in the airways. The absence of soot combined with the throat bruise
Led them to conclude she was strangled before the fire started.
Exactly. The fire was staged to cover up the murder, according to their findings.
Powerful stuff. And based on that?
Fox was arrested and charged with murdering his mother.
So the case goes to trial. What was the sizes? Big names involved.
Very big. Mr. Justice Rowlett presiding. The prosecution had Sir Henry Curtis Bennett KC and Sir William Jowett Casey, who was the Attorney General. Shows how seriously they took it.
And the defense.
J.D. Castles Casey represented Fox, but they faced a really significant problem.
Which was challenging Spilsbury's evidence.
Exactly, that bruise on the larynx. By the time the defense experts got to examine the body, decomposition had set in.
So they couldn't confirm or deny Spilsbury's finding about the bruise.
Pretty much. It made it incredibly difficult to counter the prosecution's narrative, which relied so heavily on Spilsbury's reputation and observations.
Spilsbury's word carried immense weight back then.
Immense. And the cross-examination of Fox himself must have been brutal.
What stood out there?
Jowett really hammered him. One specific point seemed particularly damaging. Fox's reason for closing his mother's door during the fire.
What was his explanation?
He claimed he did it so that smoke should not spread into the hotel.
Oh, dear. That doesn't sound great, does it? Protecting the hotel rather than trying to save his mother.
It struck many as incredibly callous, cowardly even. a very self-serving excuse in the circumstances.
Sometimes it's those seemingly small details that can tip the balance in a jury's mind.
It seems it might have done here. The jury convicted him.
Found him guilty, and the appeal.
An appeal was lodged, but the Home Secretary saw no reason to intervene.
So the sentence stood.
Yes. Sidney Harry Fox was hanged at Maidstone Jail on April 8, 1930. Swift justice, as it seemed then.
Cassels, his defense lawyer, apparently reflected later that Fox might have been acquitted.
Yes, if only he'd answered that question about closing the door differently. Maybe just saying, I don't know, in the panic of the moment.
Hindsight is a powerful thing. But at the time, it seemed like a closed case. Done and dusted.
It did, for many, many decades. But the story, as we hinted, didn't completely end there.
Right. Fast forward many years, and doubts start to surface. Tell us about the re-examination.
Well, relatively recently, in 2021, there was an episode of the TV show Murder, Mystery, and My Family that looked into the case.
And their conclusion.
They suggested the conviction was unsafe.
Unsafe. That's a strong statement. What was their reasoning? Did they propose an alternative?
They did. They suggested that Rosalina Fox most likely died of natural causes, probably heart failure, and the fire. Just a tragic accident.
Okay, so how did they tackle the original forensic evidence? The bruise, the lack of soot?
They focused heavily on that bruise Spilsbury reported. Their experts suggested it might not have been a bruise from strangulation at all.
But what else could it have been?
They proposed it could have been something called a Prinsloo-Gordon hemorrhage.
Okay, what's that?
It's essentially a type of postmortem artifact. Bruising that can appear after death due to blood pooling or settling in the tissues, especially around the neck area. It can mimic bruising caused by injury.
So something that looked like a strangulation bruise to Spilsbury, with the knowledge available then, might be interpreted differently today.
Precisely. Modern medical opinion, which was also discussed in a book called Lethal Witness back in 2007, leans towards Spilsbury's observation likely not being a true bruise from violence.
A forensic red herring, as the source material puts it.
That's the term used, yes. Suggesting that this key piece of forensic evidence, the linchpin of the prosecution's case, might have been misinterpreted.
Wow, that really changes the picture, doesn't it? If the main physical evidence of strangulation is questionable.
It casts significant doubt on the entire conviction. It makes you fundamentally reevaluate what happened.
So wrapping this up, it's quite a journey we've taken. From a con man's life to a suspicious death, a conviction based on pioneering forensics.
And then a modern reassessment challenging those very forensics. Sidney Harry Fox's case is, well, it's a chilling story about greed, certainly.
No doubt about that. He was clearly not a good man.
No. A swindler, a fraudster. But was he a murderer? That's the question that now seems much less certain.
It really highlights the evolution of forensic science, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How crucial it was then, but also how its interpretation can change with new knowledge.
Absolutely. We saw how those early findings sealed his fate. But now, looking back with nearly a century of advancements, the picture is far murkier.
So we're left with this lingering uncertainty. Was he a cold-blooded killer who planned it all, the will, the insurance, the fire?
Or was he just a rather awful, petty criminal who got caught up in a tragic accident and the science of the day mistakenly pointed towards murder?
The conflicting evidence, the different interpretations, it leaves considerable room for doubt, wouldn't you say?
I think it does. It forces us to confront the limitations of certainty, especially in historical cases.
And that really brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Think about how much our justice system relies on the science of the time.
If the evidence that condemned Fox is now seriously questioned based on what we know now, well, what other historical verdicts might deserve another look?
It's a potent reminder, isn't it? How truth can be elusive, how understanding evolves, and just how complex the search for justice really is.